developments tonight in a controversy that went all the way to the White House this week. Should the Washington Redskins change their name because some say it is racist? Sportscaster Bob Costas today took to the editorial page of the LA Times to defend his recent attack on the team. Here are his original remarks during halftime last Sunday.
Redskins can't possibly honor a heritage or a noble character trait, nor can it possibly be considered a neutral term. It's an insult, a slur, no matter how benign the present-day intent.
Dana Loesch is a conservative radio talk show host, and Richard Fowler is host of the progressive radio show, The Richard Fowler Show. Thank you both so much for being here. So, Dana, let me start with you because you actually do have Native American heritage. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, and Megan, it always seems that the people who are the most far removed from this are the ones who want to talk about it the loudest in terms of being close to American Indian culture. There was a 2004 Annenberg poll which was released, and they polled American Indians, and 90+% of them had no problem with this sports team name. And it bothers me because every single time we talk about American Indian issues, and my family has heritage, and they were listed on the rolls, and they were moved on the trail of genocide over to reservations. But whenever it seems we talk about these issues, it's always like some politically correct cosmetic band-aid. We're never talking about suicide rates. We're not talking about addictions. We're not talking about unemployment in the American Indian community. We're talking about stuff like this. I mean, changing the name of a football team isn't going to do anything to remedy years of bad policy and all of the things that are wrong with what's plaguing these particular people.
Costas came out today and doubled down on that commentary, and he was responding in part to an opinion piece written by Jonah Goldberg of National Review Online, and Jonah said, look, if you're going to get rid of Washington Redskins, you better be prepared to get rid of a whole bunch of things, including, he said, how about getting rid of the C in NAACP, right? Because like that's colored, and that's now considered racist as well. I mean, your thoughts on that, Richard?
I got to tell you, thanks for having me, Megan, but I got to agree on one point here that Dana makes, is the point that the Native American community and the indigenous people community has had a lot of struggle and a lot of strife. But there's a lot of Native Americans who believe that that the Redskins need to change their name. I reached out to the Native Youth Leadership Alliance, and they indicated that this name and these type of racial slurs and connotations have caused depression issues amongst Native youth, and I think we've got to work on correcting that. Now, I think there's a distinction between taking the word colored out of the NAACP and using a racial slur to describe a football team, and I think that is the argument that a lot of folks are trying to make, and I think that's the argument that Bob Costas is trying to make when he releases his op-ed today.
But his point, Dana, Jonah's, is that, you know, the words take on offense if you make them take on offense. I mean, for years in this country, we said midget, and nobody knew that midget was going to be offensive, and then suddenly little people decided
right.
that was an offensive term, and now you're no longer allowed to say that because it's offensive. I mean, it depends on who you ask and when you ask them.
Well, yeah, and especially when you look at the historical use of this term. I mean, this was a term. There was a book out from one of the senior linguists over at the Smithsonian Institute, and it's called I Am a Redskin, and it charts how that term came to be, how that came to be an American expression. And it was a term that actually came from Native Americans, and it was first recorded by French traders, and they heard American Indians using this phrase amongst themselves. Sitting Bull himself said, I am a red man. The Great Spirit had intended me to be a white man. He would have made me one. The bottom line in all of this is if we're going to talk about disparagement, you know, the people who have been the loudest about this had no problems with a white woman in Massachusetts who exploited American Indian culture in a Senate race. I mean, if we're going to talk about a slur, there's a slur right there, that sanctioned action. And in fact, when anyone tried to point that out, they actually, Megan, they went after Native Americans whenever they would try to correct Elizabeth Warren. Why don't we change the name to Washington Warrens? That seems to be a better fit.
What about that, Richard? I mean, she took a lot of heat, and we covered it on this show. I mean, they had very questionable Native American heritage, and when pressed on it, she said, well, my ma and my pa had high cheekbones, and that seemed to be good enough for many of the same critics now.
I don't think this is connected, this particular instance is connected to Elizabeth Warren at all. I think this is more so about individuals trying to say that the word Redskin is a racially insensitive term and it has to be changed. And I think there's a distinction here that I want to point out. So you do have the Florida Seminoles, which have been endorsed by the Seminole tribe, but the Redskins have been endorsed by none of the 562 federally registered Native tribes in this country. Beyond that fact, if you look at the actual logo of the Redskins with feathers aren't even associated with the East Coast Native American tribes. So I think we're talking about something that doesn't make any historical sense.
Right.
That's an interesting argument.
But there was no objection ever to Warren. Yeah, there was no objection ever to Elizabeth Warren, and I think that is incredibly important to bring up. But yet, folks, no, it's not insulting.
Okay.
Do you know I was called a racist for pointing out that she was a fake Indian, and her ancestors rounded up my ancestors. My ancestors were documented. Hers were only documented to actually round people up. But yet, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's about the double standard that's used from people who are objecting over Redskins. You know, there are a number of different Indian tribes that have come out and said, we don't have a problem with this. The people who have a problem with this are people like Bob Costas, and they're people like these white Anglo-Saxon Protestant liberals. Whenever these issues come up about American Indians, everybody wants to talk about political correctness. There are so many other instances of disparagement, and again, I come back to the most recent one in Massachusetts.
Okay, I got to leave it at that. Although I will point out for the record, even Charles Krauthammer suggested he doesn't like that name, and he's definitely not a liberal. But great debate, you guys. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
Thanks, Megan.
Well, again, we are back to the breaking news on that bullying case just ahead. Police possibly now charging the parents